Hi everyone. So I just wanted to take some time to go over these slides with you to focus on and make sure that you understand the key concepts that I want you to come away with from this week's lesson in morphology. Okay, so here we go. Morphology, as you might remember from the very beginning of the course, is one of our core areas of linguistics. And morphology is the study of word formation and word structures. So when we say that we know a word, what we are really saying is that we know how it sounds, we know how it's spelled, and we know what it means. And this week, we're going to be looking at breaking down the different parts of a word into morphemes. So a morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning within a word. So sometimes these morphemes hold information and they have a lot of meaning, and other times they have more of like a grammatical function. Okay, so let's look at these two examples here. You have colorful. This word colorful has two morphemes, right? These two morphemes come together to have one meaning, full of color, right? Cats, on the other hand, cats has also two morphemes, but in this situation, right, one of them is giving more of a grammatical function. So it's telling us that it's plural, right? So when these two morphemes come together, they mean more than one cat. So we'll have a closer look at the different type of morphemes in just a second here. There are many different types of morphemes, and the ones that we will be focusing on this week are free and bound. I want you to understand what this means. And we're really going to be focusing on what those bound morphemes are. So derivational affixes and inflectional affixes. So the difference between a free and bound morpheme, as we saw in that example colorful, color is a word that can occur or stand on its own. It doesn't need to be attached to anything else in order to have meaning. That means that it's a free morpheme. It doesn't depend on anybody. However, full, this suffix, right, is not a morpheme that can stand alone. It has to link up with something else. And keep in mind that this suffix is different from the word full, right? F-U-L-L. So in this case, this is a suffix, meaning that something is full of, and it has to be attached onto another morpheme. We can only use the suffix as part of another word, right? So morphemes that have to be attached to something else are called bound morphemes, okay? So we have free and bound morphemes. In these 5 examples, right, you should easily be able to separate which ones are free and which ones are bound, right? And remember that when you break up a word, when you look for kind of making things into its smallest meaning or cutting things down into their smallest meaning, every piece that we break apart has to have some kind of meaning, right? So in this case, you might have already guessed or already done this table, right? You have your free morphemes like farm, duck, goat, kill, child. And then these bound morphemes that change the meaning, right? ER goes on to farmer, means someone who farms, and et cetera, right? So you can see that it's maybe free and bound morphemes are very easy to distinguish. So next we have to talk about roots and affixes. So roots are the morphemes that carry the main meaning of the word. So every word must contain a root, right? Words with 2 roots are called compound words. A root is a word or word element from which other words grow, meaning that once we have our root, we're going to add on to that to make more words. And most roots are free morphemes, okay? Affixes, however, modify the root of a word, and they can only be bound. We have to add affixes onto a root, okay? So in English, we mostly use prefixes, which go at the beginning of the root, and suffixes, which go after the root. However, especially in this case here, there's something also called an infix, and an infix goes inside the root. So you get something like, however informal, it's still a word, California, right? So our affixes modify the root and they can only be bound. There are two different types of affixes, okay? So we can have derivational affixes and we can have inflectional affixes. So the derivational affixes are the ones that make new words out of old ones. They change the parts of speech. So they might change a word from a noun to an adjective, or a verb to an adverb, right? So in English, both prefixes and suffixes can be derivational, all right? We'll look at a few examples in a minute. Inflectional affixes are those that provide grammatical information, right? They help us understand something else that's in that sentence, such as the tense or the agreement, right? Inflectional affixes cannot change parts of speech. And there are no inflectional prefixes in English, right? So inflectional affixes are only suffixes. So in English, there are only 8 inflectional affixes. And you can see those here, okay? They're all in purple. So you have the plural S, the possessive S, the third person singular S, right? The past ED, the progressive ING, the past participle EN, you have the comparative ER, and then the superlative EST, okay? So if it's not one of these, it's a derivational affix, okay? So inflectional affixes can be easier to recognize because there are only these 8. Derivational affixes, as I said, can be both prefixes and suffixes. So any prefix or suffix that is from Greek or Latin originally is going to be derivational, right? So here you have a couple prefixes like anti, right? D, in, re, and you have example words here. And you can see how sometimes it changes. Not in these cases. In our suffixes, we'll see how derivational affixes can change the word class, right? In prefixes, you can see that they stay the same. So here's just a handful of derivational suffixes. So remember that derivational morphemes change the part of speech or the meaning of the root word, right? And if it's not one of those 8 inflectional affixes, it has to be derivational. So here are some examples. You have suffixes like able, full, less, 8, n, li, right? And you can see how most of these change the part of speech, okay? So anytime that we have that we're adding on to a root, right? When there is a derivational suffix and an inflectional suffix, they're always found in that order, right? So what I mean is that here you have your root, teach. Next, we're going to add on the derivational suffix, which is going to change the word type, right? This goes from an action to one who does this action, or a person who does this action, a teacher. And then we add on the inflectional, right, or the grammatical thing, which tells us that's the S. It tells us that there's more than one of these people, right? And they're always found in that order. So we're not going to find the plural affix before the ER, okay? All right, so this is similar to what you will be doing in this assignment here. You'll be given a word and you're asked to break it down into the different morphemes and then identify the type of morpheme. So in this case, you have the word dehumidifier. This word has 4 different morphemes, right? You have D, which is a bound derivational prefix, okay? Humid, which is a free root word. If-I, and in this case, it can be I-F-Y or I-F-I. It's not really important. Basically, it's bound. It's a suffix because it goes on to this root, right? And it's derivational. It changes the type of word. And then er. Again, we're going to bind that on. You can't find this. This doesn't really mean anything when you say it by itself, okay? And again, it's a suffix, so you're adding it on to the end of a word, of a root word. Derivational, because again, it's changing the part of speech, okay? So this is the type of thing that you're going to be doing in your assignment, and you have some examples here or some practice that you can do to get you started, okay? So check in with your answers and then just make sure that you know, right, that each part of the word that you break down has to have meaning, right? So remember back to a word like California. Just because you can break it down into something shorter like an abbreviation doesn't mean that the other parts that you break off hold any meaning, right? If Cali is an abbreviation for California, Fornia, even though it has a lot of syllables, is not a bound suffix that we can add on to other words or other states, right? So do this practice and then move on to your assignment. Okay. Thank you.